For much more about International Women's Day, we turn now to Anne-Marie Gertz. She is Chief Advisor for Governance, Peace and Security at the United Nations Development Fund for Women. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme.
It's nice to be here, thanks.
So participants attending an international conference on women in Beijing in 1995 spoke about achieving gender equality. Give us a snapshot of where we stand 15 years later.
There's been a huge amount of progress. There's many more girls in school, there's more women in parliament, many more women in jobs and the economy. But for every 2 steps forward we take, there are often 1 step that we go back. And there's a lot of progress to be made.
And has there been a backlash to this development that you're talking about?
This is one of the features of the discussions at the moment. There's a feeling that we're trying to hold on to the gains made 15 years ago, as opposed to pushing the envelope. So there have been some very significant areas of change, such as half of the countries in the world have laws to prohibit domestic violence and criminalize domestic violence. At the same time, we're seeing a serious backlash in other places with conservative ideologies, which prescribe a very conservative family role for women. And worst of all, in conflicts today, we see an increasing use of extreme sexual violence against women as a tactic of fighting, which is a sign of backlash and attack on women's roles.
Break it down for us a little bit more topically. Talk about political progress. How much progress have women made around the world when it comes to mainstream politics?
In mainstream politics, there's 75% more women in parliaments today than there were in 1995, but the rate of increase is very slow. Today, there's an average of 19% women in parliaments around the world. There are 71 countries that still have fewer than 10%. The issue about women in politics is the key. If women had power, they would be able to pass policies that advance women's rights. And the best sign of this is what's happening to the rate of maternal mortality. 1 woman dies every single minute in childbirth from easily preventable causes. The rate of maternal mortality is decreasing at 0.4% per year. If we're going to meet the goals of reducing it substantially by 2015, we have to reduce by 5.5% a year. We're far away from that. I'm convinced if women had power, this wouldn't happen. We'd be speeding up protection of women in childbirth.
And what about economic power?
There, women are in a much firmer position in terms of access to jobs, but unfortunately, women hold a much larger share of vulnerable employment than men do. Part-time, easily fired, and also women don't have secure economic assets, which enable them to be effective entrepreneurs.
So economically, they're still being exploited?
To say the least. But as the UK economist Joan Robinson said, sometimes the worst thing than being exploited is not being exploited. And if you look at countries around the world where both women and countries have made the most progress economically, it actually is where women are educated and have access to rapidly expanding jobs.
And just very briefly, what about the biggest social challenges do you think that still remain for women around the world?
Violence against women is the biggest challenge around the world. The implicit social tolerance for violence against women in many countries under the guise of culture is unacceptable, and it holds women back. It costs the US $16 billion a year to prevent violence.
Anne-Marie Gertz, thank you very much for joining us on the programme.
It's a pleasure.